Kentucky families are grieving today. 4 people were killed in a mass shooting in Florence over the weekend at a birthday party.
One of the surviving victims is a student at Eastern Kentucky University. WKYT's Kelsey Soto spoke with Chloe Parrott's father. She joins us in studio with our top story at noon.
19-year-old Chloe was shot in the chest early Saturday morning at her brother's 21st birthday party at a home in Florence. 4 people were killed, including her mother, Missy. And right now, she's inside a Cincinnati hospital working to recover from those very serious injuries. Her dad, Bruce, telling me the mother of his children, Melissa, died trying to save their daughter, and he is forever grateful. Now, he wasn't at the birthday party for his son, but lives just a few miles down the road. And at 3 a.m., he got a heart-stopping call and rushed to the scene. He tells me it's a horror he'll never forget.
I parked at the top of the street and ran down to the house, ran in the house where I saw all the carnage of a scene that I don't think any human being should ever have to witness in their life. And I thought that I saw Chloe deceased in the corner. And so I thought Chloe was gone.
Bruce says initially he didn't even know that his ex-wife Melissa had been killed, but when he saw Chloe being loaded onto a gurney and taken away into an ambulance, he tells me it was a huge sigh of relief, but of course a roller coaster of emotions. Those first words that he heard from her were incredibly bittersweet. We'll have much more on this story coming up tonight on your news at 5 and 6.
All right, Kelsey, thanks. The shooter, 21-year-old Chase Garvey, took off. Police say he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This was the first mass shooting ever reported in Florence. The 3 people still in the hospital are expected to recover. We have a link to their fundraising pages inside this story on WKYT.com.